We're Democrats.
Independents.
And Republicans.
As judges, our job is not about politics.
It's about standing up for what's right.
And that's why we all support Cheri Beasley.
As a campaign ad in support of North Carolina Democratic Senate candidate Cheri Beasley. She was the very first woman to serve as the Chief Justice of the North Carolina Supreme Court. She's currently vying to fill the seat of retiring Republican Senator Richard Burr. And she would become, if elected, North Carolina's very first black U.S. senator in history. Polls currently place Beasley neck and neck with GOP Congressman Ted Budd, who won Donald Trump's endorsement, I should note. Well, Budd has notably embraced the most radical GOP positions on abortion rights, access to contraceptive care, and even the big lie questioning the results of the 2020 election. I just want to remind everybody the election we had was one of the most secure in history, and these claims of massive fraud were always and are still not true. But Judge Beasley, I should note, has made a point to distance herself from the far left policies in an attempt to appeal to more moderate voters in the state of North Carolina. At a recent campaign stop, she not only pushed back against the once popular defund the police movement, she suggested she'd work with Republicans to boost police funding. So I want to talk to her about that today, and she's joining me now, North Carolina Democratic nominee for the Senate, Judge Cheri Beasley. So, Judge, thank you so much for being here. Is defunding the police a message that you think is misunderstood?
Well, Zerlene, it's great to be here. I don't support defund the police. And, I am a Black mother with twin sons who are African-American, an African-American husband, and I certainly worry about their safety every single day. But I've served as a judge for 2 decades, and I know that we must support funding for law enforcement, and we need to keep communities safe. Every community wants and needs to be safe. And it really is important that the best way for law enforcement and the communities to work together really is that they work in tandem. Law enforcement certainly needs the resources to retain and recruit good officers. They need funding for fighting the opioid crisis and gun crime. And we need violence prevention programs. And so we have to come together on this issue and not let it be a divisive issue. It is an issue that really is been created to divide us. And it's not one that should divide us. Communities need and want to be safe. And we need to make sure that police have funding to do that.
Why do you think it's so divisive? Because in the summer of 2020, we had what we called at the time a racial reckoning. Every corporation was like, we love Black and brown people and we're hiring them, and everybody was trying to, quote unquote, look like they were woke, for lack of a better term, in that moment. And in 2020, I felt like America was moving forward, at least in the conversation around racial justice and policing. Do you think we got off track? I mean, why is it that we went from everybody saying, yes, we need reforms to policing, to Democrats, including the president, saying, I'm not for defunding the police?
Well, I think everybody also, in addition to funding police and making sure that they have the resources that they need and making sure that they're working in tandem with communities, also want to make sure that there is transparency and accountability. And these are not adversarial issues. They shouldn't be. They shouldn't be made to be. And we have too much business to work on. And that, part of my work in running for the Senate really is about making sure that communities are safe. I've done that my entire years of service. And my opponent has been one to spread the big lie. He called the mob that attacked the Capitol patriots. We need to be supportive of each other. And we don't need to let, whether it's this issue or any other issue that arises in this campaign, as so many people in North Carolina, as I'm traveling across the state, really are challenged by a whole host of issues. None of these issues are divisive, nor are they partisan. I mean, everybody in North Carolina deserves to have good representation in the Senate, and that's really what I'm working and fighting for.
One of the things that's come up is the fact in conversation about the state of North Carolina in this moment, is this idea that your win would allow the Democrats to get rid of the filibuster. you'd be one of those Senate races that would facilitate their ability to remove the filibuster and maybe even pass a policing reform bill if it were to be introduced. Do you see your campaign as one of the facilitators of the Democrats' ability to govern and pass some of these pieces of legislation like voting rights and policing that have been held up because of the filibuster?
You know, what I know is that people here in North Carolina are tired of the stalemate. They want to know that the work of the Senate can move forward. And I do support eliminating the filibuster. It is a tool of gridlock that hinders the passage of legislation that the majority of people here in North Carolina support. And along with that, I certainly respect the rule of law. I have my entire years of service, and I certainly have spent my time upholding the Constitution. And so these are deeply important in terms of being a good senator and standing strong for what's right here for the state. I'd also encourage our viewers that if they would like more information about my candidacy, that they go to SherryBeasley.com.
My last question in the last minute here is, if you're elected, you'll be the only black woman in the Senate, which, you know, I feel like representation is important. When I look at the Senate, there's a lot of white men, there is Asian representation, there is LGBTQ plus representation, but there is no black woman. How would you change even the conversations and the dynamic in the Senate if elected as the first black woman?
Well, a black woman and black mother. And, you know, representation does matter. And all of our institutions and government entities really do need to reflect the diversity of who we are as North Carolinians and as Americans. And I know that there are a whole host of issues that I am really running strong on. I mean, people in North Carolina really are greatly challenged around rising prices and feeling the pain at the pump, although it's a little bit less pain right now, to being able to afford prescription drug costs and everything else in between. And so those issues are really important. But I also know that as important as the Senate looks is how the Senate works. And it's just not working for people here in North Carolina. It is not at all lost on me, the magnitude of my candidacy and what that means for people in North Carolina. And it does matter that there's an African-American woman serving in the Senate. All of us come to the table with our own respective personal and professional perspectives on a whole host of things. And so I look forward to helping to expand what that dialogue looks like on really important issues that people here in North Carolina care about.
Judge Cheri Beasley, thank you so much for being here today. Please stay safe. Hi, I'm Zerlina Maxwell. Thanks for checking out our channel on YouTube. You can see more from Zerlina by clicking any of the videos on this screen, and make sure you subscribe below to stay up to date on the day's biggest stories. Thanks for watching.